Good evening, Demon Phil Comics in More New Jersey here. Got another great interview for you this evening. And this evening is going to be a fun one. There's a lot of personal connections to what's going to be going on this evening. And we'll get into that here very shortly. But first, let's go ahead and do what we normally do. If you will go in the comments and let me know as you come in here that you can see and hear me, I would appreciate that. And then if you will also share this out, please share it out. Let people know they need to come watch this thing. And keep in mind, we are seven followers away from the 1,000 milestone mark on YouTube, which is phenomenal. I am so excited about this, and I have got a huge show set up. So we need to hit that 1,000 milestone, and we're going to have some serious fun with that. So again, as you go ahead and come in here, if you'll let me know you can see and hear me, I'd appreciate that. And then definitely get this shared out. And we will go ahead and go from there. While we're doing that, I'm going ahead and sharing from my side. My guest is going ahead and sharing from his side as well. And we're going to get this going in about, we'll give it about another minute here. Hope everyone has had a great day, been able to get a lot done out there, been safe, wash your damn hands. You know, the normal things you got to go ahead and do in this. And we are, let me see, making sure everything is set up on this end. All right, we are almost to that point. Again, if you're in here and you can see and hear me, please let me know. And then we will get started with this promptly. Go ahead and remove the banner, and we'll go ahead and get started into the show officially. All right, Demon Phil, Comics and More New Jersey, and I'm here with yet another interview. We've had a stream of amazing interviews pretty much ever since I've started doing this thing. So why stop now? The tempo just keeps going up. I don't know how much further we can keep this thing going up, but we're going to definitely push the limits and see what we can do. But before I get ahead of myself, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors, since this show does have sponsors on this, and I'm very thankful for them. Sub-Zero Mission, which is a huge one that everyone knows that I definitely really want to push. They actually save lives by going out in their area every winter to go ahead and help the homeless vets that are out there, give them the tools they need and the blankets, the sleeping bags, hats, boots, anything that they could possibly need to go ahead and survive through it. If you don't know enough about this particular organization, look into my wall, find the information there. If you want to know more information or you can't find it on my wall, get with me, please. I'll point you in the direction to go ahead and get you some information on that. Next up, we have Totally Rad Comics, which has got Totally Rad Life of Violet #3 coming out June 16th on Kickstarter. Third Empire banner, which has Mojo Rising coming out on Tuesday of next week. We'll be launching that one. We'll actually have a launch party for that one, so get your mojo on. Codex Entertainment, which has got Lily the Demoness #4, which is going to be coming out on Kickstarter in July. 183 Degree Studio, which is Kara Nicole and Alfred Trujillo. That is Confessions of a Cosplay Diva, which is going on right now on Kickstarter. If you don't know about that one, you definitely need to jump over there and see what's going on and support them in any way possible. Comic Art Groupie, which is a fairly new one to us. That is actually Wendy Steen Shaner. She was gracious enough to go ahead and support us on this as well. So she has actually got Naughty Fairies #4, which is going to be coming out the end of June, if I'm not mistaken. And then finally we have, and she is right up here at the top here, we have Pantsless Pizza is our final sponsor that's on here. And there is much more information to come around that, as everybody knows. We've just gotten started having fun with her. Now, all that said, here we go. Now, normally I go ahead and I just introduce the guest and we kind of go into it and everything. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. So I've got to go ahead and do something a little more unorthodox as an intro. So you may want to back away from your speakers just a hair, because I'm going to get into this one a little bit. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's time! Demon Phil, Comics and More New Jersey, is proud to announce John Crowther.
I love it. I love it. That was great. And you got to tell me, who's this Pantsless Pizza lady?
She is a work in progress. That is a long story that's about to have a lot of detail that's going to be put into it. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, that was a nice lead in. I'm like the Pantsless pizza lady. I got to ask about that.
John, welcome to the show. Appreciate having you here tonight.
Thank you.
For those of you that are out here that don't know who he is and everything, John, if you'll take a moment and tell us who you are, what you do, and how to find you.
Okay, I am a comic book writer. I'm based in Central Florida, just outside of Orlando. I initially got into the business working with Antarctic Press with a series some of you might have heard of called Rochelle. Originally, it was actually Rochelle the Teenage Cockroach, and we ran with AC Comics for a bit. And I also write Antarctic Press's horror comic series. I write for their exciting comic series, and I'm a contributing writer to Heavy Metal Magazine. And probably more popularly, people have found me because I write a series of professional wrestling comics for Squared Circle Comics, which I was the co-founder of. We do a lot of autobiographical stories on a lot of the legends from over the years. First one we did was Nikolai Volkov, Bruno Sammartino, and a bunch of those. So that's who I am.
Very cool. Now, I'm going to ask you a series of questions on here. We're just going to kind of have some fun with this and roll with it. So how did you get your start in comics?
Well, I was a big fan of comics since I was a kid. I don't know how old you are, Phil, but I remember when I was growing up, comic book stores weren't really, at least in the area that I grew up, they weren't as common as they are now. I mean, you didn't have these huge, massive stores full of comics and things like that. What we had were Rexall Drugs. So I was a little kid. I'd get dropped off by the school bus, walk to my parents' office, and always pass one of these Rexall Drugs with an old spinner rack. And I'd usually have a few dollars. I could get comics for between 50 cents, 75 cents. I'd always load up every week with a new stack, most of which I still have actually. And that's what I loved, So progressed through life. I was always reading comics. I was also a fan of wrestling at the same time. And in my 40s, I was still writing, but I had a teenage daughter, and she was a big fan of comics as well. And we would enjoy going to comic book conventions together. The one we generally would hit was over in Tampa, the Tampa Bay Comic Con. But one of the things I saw that disturbed me, at least being the father of a teenage girl, was I didn't feel that there were enough female comic book characters that were lead characters that weren't hypersexualized, at least in their attire and how they were treated. So I've always been a firm believer in if you don't like something, you change it. So I came up with an idea about a comic. It was the Rochelle character. It was about a teenage girl with cockroach DNA. And I just wrote a blind letter off to a comic book artist that I had admired when I was a kid. His name's Del Barris. And Del had done some work. He was one of the artists on the Blue Beetle back in the 80s. He initially actually got into comics in the 70s as a anchor on Savage Sword of Conan, which was another series that I always enjoyed. So I wrote him a letter. I told him this idea about this cockroach girl. And lo and behold, about 2 months later, I got a package actually in the mail from him with some original art in it, a letter and his business card that said, "I love it, call me." So I called him, and he said, first thing he said was, "It's Barris, not bare ass." And we had a nice conversation, and he says, "Why don't you send me a script?" Of course, I'd never written a script, So again, following my motto of "you don't know how to do it, figure it out," I said, let's figure out how to write a comic book script. So I did some online searching, and I found a website for Marv Wolfman, who I had also admired as a kid. Big fan of the original Crises on Infinite Earth series, and sent him a message and told him what my conundrum was. And he said, "Well, let me send you a script." So he sent me an autographed script actually that served as my template. So that's how I got into comics. I wrote my first comic. I wrote my first script, sent it off to Dell. It was picked up by AC Comics. That was in 2014, and I've been chugging along ever since.
Very nice. That's a huge way to go ahead and jump in whenever you hadn't really gotten your feet wet in the first place, to go ahead and just get right in there. That's interesting to go in that way.
And I'll be honest, it's exciting. I mean, I can honestly say that I have not written a comic yet that wasn't published, whether it be the wrestling books or whether it be the Rochelle series. We had a nice run with Antarctic with that. In fact, she's going to be making an appearance in a new book they got come out, Ben Dunn's running, called Indie Wars. and I was able to jump into horror comics and exciting comics, and again, as I mentioned, the heavy metal series, was always heavy metal was a big, kind of like a holy grail for me as I was getting older. Not so much as a kid, but as I was getting older, and I was proud to say by 2020, my first attempt, I found myself in the pages of Heavy Metal magazine too. So it's been a blessed year, really lucky year, however you want to look at it, or not year, but years, past 5 years of just trying to stay in the forefront, trying to improve myself more and more as I go along. And I've been lucky and really happy with it.
Very nice. That's very cool, because now we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about your current Kickstarter.
Okay.
I'm going to do a screen share here shortly, but we're going to go ahead and kind of briefly go over what exactly it is, because there's kind of a misconception on there, because it's an encyclopedia, but it's not an encyclopedia. So if you kind of explain exactly how that works with that.
Yeah, it's kind of like a crossover. So what's happened is over the last, as I mentioned, over about the last 5 years, I've actually been building a library of authorized biographical wrestling comics. So it started with Nikolai Volkov. Nikolai and I became friends out of our mutual love of comics. We kind of were introduced when he found my Rochelle series, and he actually enjoyed it. So I was given his phone number. We talked on the phone, and he told me, he said, "Hey, John, I've talked to several guys about doing a comic on my life, and once we start talking, they don't call me back." And I said, "Nikolai, I'll tell you right now, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I promise you I'll get it done." So, we started talking, and we ended up doing a 3-issue series for him that was later actually picked up by Antarctic Press as well. For some of you might, it was some collectors that kind of jumped on that series. It was known as Turnbuckle Titans, Nikolai Volkov, and that ran with Antarctic, and also with Squared Circle Comics. He introduced me around and put me in touch with Bruno Sammartino. I also ended up meeting up with Brian Blair. So subsequently, since 2015, we've done books on Nikolai, Bruno, the Killer Bees, Rock and Roll Express, Lanny Poffo, Jake Hager. For those of you who are fans of the Glow, the original Glow series, Sunny the California Girl. So we've really put some really cool books out. So what we've done now is, as we've collected all these issues, we decided what would be kind of cool for fans would be to put together what we call the comic book encyclopedia of pro wrestling. So what we've done is we've collected a large group of the books we've done, not exactly all of them. We don't have the Rocky Johnson book in here, but we do have Bobby Fulton's and the others that I mentioned. And we're putting them together in a 280 plus page kind of an omnibus of professional wrestling stories. And then in between these, we're also inserting encyclopedia type entries between 1 to 2 pages. They kind of go over the history of each of the wrestlers, their biggest opponents, some of their biggest matches, and their greatest achievements and such. It's kind of put in it. So it ends up coming out to, honestly, it's going to be close to a 300-page book. Really nicely put together. For those of you who like to do Kickstarters, it is zero risk. I mean, the book, everything about the book is done other than just, knowing how many we need to print. It's got a great price. All these stories are authorized. And when I say authorized, we have contracts with each of the wrestlers that we've worked with. And I sat down individually with each one of them, and we interviewed, and we spent several hours going over what they view as the highlights of their career, which to me is pretty cool, because while you and I might have ideas of what we think are the highlights of some of these individuals' careers, what they view as their highlights might be a little bit different. So we're giving you right out of their mouths what they view as the highlights of their life and their careers in wrestling.
Now I've got the screen share on here right now, so we're showing the project right now.
Yep.
So here it is. I'm starting off from the beginning. I apologize. I was down there a little bit further, but I didn't want to go through so fast. Everybody had motion sickness.
Yeah, so you'll see we set an initial goal at $4,000, I believe, or was it $3,000? Maybe it was
3,000, yeah.
$3,000, and we actually satisfied that in about 22 hours. We are now, and my eyesight is horrible, so I'm looking at your screen as you're rolling this. We are now, I think, $500 away from doing 200% and crossing our third stretch goal. So what happens on each of these stretch goals, we will insert an additional encyclopedia entry. The first one we added when we crossed that 4,000 barrier was Miss Elizabeth. We added
Mhm.
Hulk Hogan at the 5,000, and I think we've got Jake Roberts sitting at 6, and
Mhm.
Paul Orndorff sitting at 7. Something else that's really cool about this too, for those of you who are autograph collectors or memorabilia collectors, every day we give away a free autograph to one backer. All you gotta do is back the book, and it puts you in the running. And so far, we've given out some great ones: Nikolai autographs, Ricky Morton, the Killer Bees, Jake Hager. I think we gave a Sonny autograph out. I know we gave out a Hacksaw autograph, or we will if we haven't yet. So there's some really good stuff out there that you can pick up. Not to mention, even if you aren't lucky enough to win any of them, we've still got autograph stuff from some of those single issues we did in the past that you can tag into the book when you pick it up. Which we're selling, honestly, the book, you might be able to see it on there, is only $24.99, and that to me is a pretty good deal for a 300-page comic book.
Yes. And I did back it, and
Thank you.
I was floored because I actually won the Nikolai Volkov card. They sent me the email saying, that they wanted to congratulate me, blah blah blah. And I had to look it over 3 or 4 times, thinking that I was just tagged in it or something. But yeah, I actually won it, so
Yeah,
I'm excited about
congratulations.
that.
Yeah, congratulations. The publisher does that selection, so it wasn't rigged, because I had no idea until you told me. So congrats on that. I'm really happy for you. That's a nice card. And I actually sat with Nikolai when he signed all those things, and he really had it. We had a good time, really good time doing that.
And here are some of the encyclopedia entries and the way that it's going to look inside there. And like he was saying, there's actually the comic books are inside there, which is 24 to 32 pages thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got these inserted in between each one. So there is a lot of
There's a lot of
volume to
info
these.
Yeah, there's a lot of info in there. And what I try to do with all these books, to me, a lot of these guys, you might know some of it from history, but a lot of these guys had some pretty amazing lives even before they got into wrestling. So a good example of that would be Bruno. We talk about Bruno's life. We talk about, how as a young boy, he hid from the Nazis literally with his mother and his siblings in the mountains of Pizziforato, Italy. And being a guy who was the WWF champion for 11 years and a world record holder in the bench press, he couldn't get into the United States when he was a boy because he was so malnourished. So it tells that story. It talks about his first match. Maybe you can answer it. Here, a little trivia for you. Do you know who, well, you might have known if you got a preview, but do you know who Bruno's first professional opponent was?
Oh, I cannot think right now.
It was an orangutan.
That's right. Yes.
He wrestled an orangutan. He was known as the Pittsburgh Strongman, and he was working on construction sites. And they found a circus was coming into town, and I remember him telling me the story. It was actually funny when he was saying it. His buddies had laid down money that he could last 15 minutes with an orangutan. So he said he was scared as hell. He didn't want to. He's like, what could I do? These are my buds. I can't freak out in front of them and say I'm not going to do it. So I showed up, and it was advertised as a monkey. So he shows up at this cage. They rip the curtain off, and it's not really a monkey. It's an orangutan. But he couldn't back out. So he hopped in, and lo and behold, he actually made it the entire 15 minutes with this orangutan. And they beat the hell out of each other before the circus guy, the trainer, actually called it and told him, "You have to stop. You're hurting my orangutan." And he made his money, and there was his first pro match. But that's the kind of stuff we're getting into. We talk about their backstories, and then we get into the matches. But because I'm a huge, longtime fan of pro wrestling, I believe in the magic of pro wrestling. So we stay kayfabe on the matches. We don't give away the secrets. So you're seeing them win titles. You're learning about their history in the ring and out of the ring.
Yeah, it's interesting to get the backstories because sometimes they're larger than life whenever they're up there. So you forget that they're still humans, that they actually have backstories on things that they did.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny you say that, because I remember when I was pitching the whole idea to Bruno and to Nikolai and even later to Brian Blair, that, not to take anything away from our soldiers or our policemen or firefighters and things like that, but when I was a kid, you would think, to me, a professional wrestler kind of epitomized what I saw as a superhero in a comic. I mean, these guys were bigger than life. They were faster. They could literally fly because they'd fly off of a top rope. They could do things that we couldn't do. Plus, they came in costumes, you know. So these were literally living superheroes on the TV every single day. And I remember when I said that to Brian Blair, and you might have seen if you had the preview that had Brian's comic in it. You know, that's what he told me. He said, you know, when I decided to be a professional wrestler, he said, I was just a little kid. And I had my dad asked me, he says, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be one of two things, Dad. I either want to be a superhero or Superman, I think is what he actually said. I either want to be a superhero or I want to be a pro wrestler. So he threw a little cape on, he got on the back of the couch, he leaped off the couch and he landed face first on the floor. And he said, I realized then and there that I wasn't Superman, but I could still be a pro wrestler. So that, you know, so it kind of ties in. These guys really are, like you said, they're characters, they're living characters, and they were built for comics.
Exactly. All right. So got a surprise in the backstage. So whenever I was approached by you and by Kevin Laporte, which has got Inverse Press doing this as well. So whenever I was approached by both of y'all, I immediately started thinking, hey, you know, with wrestling and everything, yeah, I've got a little bit of a background in this and I've dealt with some of these things and everything, but do I know any wrestlers? Do I know anybody that I can actually bring on or anything? And better yet, do I know any wrestlers that are actually into comics as well? Well, one name came into mind and I approached her and she was all kinds of thumbs up and wanted to be on here. So she's excited to be here. And John doesn't even know who I brought in on this one.
Yeah, he got me wondering. Is it? Yeah.
So let me go ahead and announce her. Oh, wait, do I need to do this announcer voice? Let me go ahead and get into this because we got to get into character with this one. Now entering the studio, Miss December Lace.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome
Thanks
to the
for having
show.
me.
Welcome to the show. Happy you could be here.
Oh, thanks for having me. Sorry about the technical difficulties earlier. John, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Nice to see you. Nice surprise.
I didn't want him expecting it like a huge name. He's gonna be like, who the hell is that? Like, what?
Well, December's been there. She's been in the squared circle. She's dealt with, the issues that are around that and all. Plus, she loves comics. So I figured, hey, she'd be a great one to have on here to kind of bounce things around.
Absolutely.
I'm not famous, but some of my friends are.
Now,
that's what I say all the time.
For those of you that out there that don't know who this is, December, if you will go ahead and let us know who you are, what you do, and how to find you.
My name is December Lace. I was a professional wrestler for 8.5 years, primarily in the Chicago area. I wrestled for 8.5 years. The most notable wrestling federation that I wrestled for was OVW, which was a developmental training camp. The longest one that I wrestled for was Pro Championship Wrestling in Chicago. I held the Pro Championship Wrestling Women's Championship for 5 times on separate occasions. And I've wrestled some of the most prominent women names in the industry. I've wrestled Mickie James, Jazz, Tracy Brooks, and I've also wrestled for Sparkle, which is the Shimmer pre-show.
Very nice.
Super.
Now, you do have a fan out here, so let me go ahead and bring this up real quick.
I have one fan, yay. Hi, Tom.
Now that I've got you in here, we were just kind of going over the current Kickstarter, which is the comic book, let me make sure I get this right, the comic book encyclopedia of pro wrestling.
Yep.
If you haven't seen it yet, December, I'm going to send you the link so you can definitely go take a look at that.
I've seen it. It's awesome.
Okay, very cool.
Now, our plans are, we hadn't talked about that, our plans are to continue with these volumes because I mentioned the guys who were in this one and one gal. We've got Sonny, who was one of the original Glow wrestlers. We've got Hacksaw Jim Duggan in here. We've got Lanny Poffo, Bruno, Nikolai Volkov, Brian Blair and Jim Brunzell, and Ricky Morton, Bobby Fulton. A nice collection. But we've got another collection of guys that I'm working with currently. The first one, which sadly, he had actually become a very good friend of mine. And I feel blessed that we got his book out, but he died right afterwards, and that was Rocky Johnson. So Rocky will definitely be the lead off in volume 2. And I'm currently working with Terry Funk and Magnum TA, which was a really exciting one for me because I was a huge fan of Magnum when he was down here and wrestling in the NWA. And then he had that horrible accident that took him out of wrestling, really. And this will be, I remember when I was talking to him in Jacksonville, this will be the first book he has done since his accident, which I feel really privileged that he has the faith in me to put that together for him. So we've got Magnums, we've got Terry's. I've got a surprise for you because I know you're a big DX fan, so I'll hit that one last. But we've got the Warlord, Terry Sapinski, who we're working with on a nice book. We've got Hollywood, who was actually the first woman ever signed by the Glow promotion. And then I've got 2 words for you, Billy Gunn. So we got Billy Gunn's in production as well. I went to high school with Billy's wife, and she would. Thankfully, she helped put that together. So Paula gave me a call and said, well, actually what she said is, why aren't you doing my husband's comic book? So I said, well, let's make it happen then. So, well, that's kind of nice. It gives us that nice AEW connection too, since we're doing Jake Hager's and we've got Billy's that's going to be coming out here hopefully in 2021.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, in going with this, because we're going off of the wrestling energy off of this, and now that I've got December in here, there's even more energy in here, which is great. So we're going to kind of go around this, and I'm going to ask y'all some questions and kind of get to know your wrestling lives a little bit more and what you've dealt with. So now, Tom, I want to hear this on your next show. I want to hear you actually do this on your next show. That is great. So the first thing is, we're going to start off with, I'm going to go ladies first on this one. So December, what was your most memorable wrestling moment?
I was privileged enough to have a lot of them. There were times when they gave me the microphone and for some reason let me talk in front of an audience, and I had kind of a general framework of what I wanted to say, and sometimes I just kind of like went in the zone and I had no idea what I wanted to say, and then it's like I've never been drunk, but I just kind of like black out, I guess is what other people say that's like, and then when I come back, people are like, dude, that was awesome. And I'm like, I have no idea what I just said. So that kind of happened one time. It's not really the most memorable because I don't really even remember what I did, but we had, it was a mixed tag team match, and it was Matt Hardy and Rebby Sky against me and my tag team partner, Joe Heisman. And he was like the mouthpiece for our like tag team. And we never really got to wrestle together because it was just such a weird mashup. It was a mixed tag because there was barely any women for me to wrestle, let alone put together in a mixed tag match. So it was one of the few times that they were like, oh, he's got Rebby with them and then you two, so why don't we just put you guys together? So in order to stir up interest for the match, right, before the main event, they had us talk trash to each other beforehand. So Matt Hardy was in the ring, and it was our job to go interrupt him. So we're in the gorilla position, and Joe Heisman, he's getting amped up, and I never talk for our group, like ever. It was always him on the mic. He looks at me, our music hits, and he goes, you talk first, and then he just shoots out of the entranceway, and I'm like, what? And it's Matt Hardy, so I'm like, I have no idea what I'm like, I didn't prepare for this at all. So I just go out there and I grab the stick and I just kind of went. And one of my friends was there, and he said that I don't know if this is true or not because I'm still kind of like weary of watching the footage, but he's like, you out-promoed Matt Hardy. That was awesome. Like, you were just talking so much crap to him. I'm like, what? I say? I didn't really insult him or anything, did I? But I remember not stuttering. I remember keeping the crowd going, and I just remember not repeating myself, so that was good. But I just remembered I didn't want to like spit in his face or anything, and I didn't want to like trip over my words or anything like that. But I was pretty happy about that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It sounds like with my show, every time I kind of black out, and then all of a sudden somebody tells me I have a good show, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess so. That's very cool, though. I mean, it's a lot of it's memories that are made like that, but it's actually whenever you're put on the spot and you have a good memory like that is really cool because you're out of your wheelhouse at that moment.
I think what happened, though, was when I got backstage, I just looked at Joe. I was like, you dick, don't ever do that to me again. Why did you do that? And we still had to wrestle later on.
John, what about you? What's your favorite moment in wrestling?
I've had so many great ones in the last few years, just being able to work with these guys, and honestly, guys that I really admired as a kid. To me, it's just an amazing experience to be able to talk to them now. But one that really stands out from when I was a kid, actually, when the magic of wrestling was still such to the point that everything you saw, you believed. My dad, I grew up near Daytona Beach, and my father was the attorney for Kevin Sullivan. And this was at the time when Kevin Sullivan was doing his dark side gimmick, where he'd throw fireballs at people and stuff like that. So I'd see that stuff on in the morning, and I honestly believed he was chucking fireballs at people. And so I had come home from school one day, and what would happen is I'd get off the school bus, I'd walk to my dad's office, and I'd sit in a little room where I was supposed to do all my homework, before I could go and ride my bike home. So I'm sitting there doing my homework. I look up, and in walks Kevin Sullivan and a woman. And I'm like, I don't know if I can say this on here. I'm like, holy shit, that's freaking Kevin Sullivan. And he's going to throw a fireball at my dad. I mean, I was only like, 10, 11 years old. So Kevin Sullivan, my dad's talking to him. He brings him in, and how the office is, it's an old house that was built like in the 1800s. So it's kind of all these different little rooms. So dad walks him past me, takes him through the library and into his office. And I go running in there, and my dad's office is in a room that used to be outside. So there's these little windows that were kind of like little porthole windows. So I roll the chair up and I stand up and I'm trying to peek through this window. My mom's there and she's like, honey, you can't do that. This is a place of work. Your dad's in there with a client. And I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. Dad's in there with the devil. And of course, my mom, she knew I loved wrestling because I had gotten into wrestling with her grandfather. It was my great grandfather. And I would go over to his house. He was like almost 90 years old. He was part Cherokee Indian, and he was a huge fan of Wahoo McDaniel. So when anything happened, he would be jumping up and down, screaming at the TV because he believed everything was real. So obviously I believed everything because it was my great grandfather. So I'm like, Mom, you don't understand. This guy's going to throw fireballs at Dad. And my mom's like, no, honey, it's okay. He may be the devil, but he's your dad's client, and he's not going to do anything to your dad, because she didn't want to take away the magic of wrestling and say it wasn't real. So that one has always stood out for me. And luckily enough, I want to say it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, I went to a Legends Luncheon event in Tampa, Florida with Brian Blair. And lo and behold, there was Kevin Sullivan. And he may live up in Seattle now or something, but he had flown in for a championship wrestling from Florida event that was going to be happening in Lutz that weekend. And I actually went up and talked to him, and he remembered it. Actually, I shouldn't say he believed it. He actually remembered it because he remembered coming out and meet me. He knew my dad. He remembered my dad and asked how Dad was. I thought that was actually pretty cool. Obviously, when he saw me, I'm a little older. I got a gray beard and all this kind of stuff. He didn't remember me from being the little kid, but he absolutely remembered the occurrence when he came in there. So that one has always stood out. It's just a special memory.
Your dad was in there with the devil back then.
He was in there with the devil. No fireballs were flying, but Dad was in there with him.
Yeah, that's interesting with that. With me, I grew up on Houston wrestling. My dad and I used to stay up Saturday nights watching that. My mom would come in late at night and say, "What are you two still doing up, watching wrestling?" And my dad would go straight up into parenting mode and look over at me and go, "Boy, you were supposed to be in bed, an hour ago. You're supposed to go to bed. Let's go to bed right now." So it would kind of get us both off the hook by him being the quote unquote bad guy. I do remember with Houston wrestling, I absolutely, and I'm going to get in trouble for this, but let me explain. I absolutely hated the Von Erichs simply because my dad went ahead and used this on me very often. And if you don't know what this is, it hurts. And he would laugh about it, and he would say, do you give up? Do you quit? I don't like, I quit matches because I don't quit. And my dad knew this, and he would put that thing on me until I was basically passing out. And we'd have a great time and laugh about it later on and everything. But yeah, it got to the point where I was like, oh man, those Von Erichs, daggum.
Bad influence.
But it was very cool. I mean, it was, back then wrestling was more, how should I put this? It wasn't all the smoke and mirrors, the glamour and things like that. There's my next thing that I want to put out there in December. I know we're on, virtual here, so don't body slam me or anything from way over there. Let me finish first. Because I want to go ahead and put the question out there, is wrestling fake? And I'm going to start with December on this one because I already know my answer to this one. And yeah, it's not what you think. So December, if you will go ahead with this, is wrestling fake?
My body says it's real.
Exactly. Exactly. So kind of like, why do people think that wrestling is fake? That's the one thing that has always irritated me, is because you're watching people who are doing things. You're watching some of the most amazing moves that bodies are not supposed to be able to do. And then sometimes they land in ways they're not supposed to have done. And yet people are still going, this is fake. So let me ask you, December, has anybody ever come up to you saying, how did you go through wrestling and everything? It's just fake.
Well, they don't ever come up to me and say that's fake, because they know that I will smack them. That's not like a joke. And actually I stand by, I'm blanking on his name, but John Stossel getting his ass kicked for saying that.
Yeah.
I stand by that.
Dr. D.
Yeah. I stand by that. It's rude. I know that he's trying to do his expose and all of that, and his reasons for doing it was skewered, and there's this whole backstory behind it, and everybody's got their own reasons for why they did what they did. It just goes beyond this whole, like, is it fake, a yes or no answer. Just even a simple, like, compact question is that, and why he did it. It's many reasons are behind that. But anyway, you can dissect that whole thing. There's lots of reasons behind that, but yeah, he should have gotten slapped for that. I've never been asked that point blank, because they know my background of work, and they know that I was in the gym a lot, training. They know that I am very disciplined for what I did, and I took it very seriously. I've had it shouted at the group of wrestlers that I was with as a whole, because they felt like they couldn't get beat up by a group of 5 guys and a female wrestler, which I think is kind of even more strange. There is one analogy that I've heard that kind of sums it up pretty well, and that's like, no one goes to a movie and just when you see a really powerful movie and they're like, oh, that's fake. Like, you don't just see, for me, I'll just use Joker as an example, because that affected me very profoundly. You don't see a movie like Joker and just, like, at the very end of the movie, just, oh, it's fake. Did it elicit emotion in you? The emotion that you felt, was that real? Then that's real. And then you don't just go and call that fake to somebody.
I completely agree on all ends on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, you made some very good points. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to go ahead and bring that up, because too many people have that closed-minded thing of, that's what they hear, or that's what they've been told, or they only watch the snippets they want to watch on certain things, and they just automatically think that. But I wanted to go ahead and get your perspective. Now I want to go ahead and get John's perspective on this too, because I know you've had a lot of experience within this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, a lot with what December said. I think what happens is, I think too many people focus too much on the predetermined ending idea of professional wrestling. And they don't look at the athleticism of the people that are involved. They don't look at the backgrounds of the people that are involved. They don't realize that you take a 300-pound man, or a 400-pound man, or a 100-and-something pound woman, and you jump them off a top rope, or you have them do some of the maneuvers they've done, and you call that fake. You look at the training of some of these individuals and what they've had. I mean, talk to a Brian Blair. I remember talking to him about his training with Hiro Matsuda and the judo training they had to go through, because it wasn't just about what happened in the ring. It was about having to defend themselves getting from the ring back to the locker room because the fans were so crazed at wanting to get a piece of them. Or you talk to Nikolai Volkov, who was a world-class judo fighter actually before he ever even came to the West and went to Calgary to train with Stu Hart. I mean, these people that are seeing, these men and these women, these are some of the greatest athletes on the planet. And not just athletic, but athletic at a size that's, in a lot of instances, is beyond your even imagination. I mean, you see professional football players that can't cut it in professional wrestling. You see athletes from all different areas, all the different spectrums that can't cut it in professional wrestling. It's not fake. Some of the endings may be somewhat predetermined, but a lot of times they even call that crap in the ring. I mean, this isn't, everything isn't just a Hollywood script that they walk out and reenact. It's in live television, and you never know what's going to happen in that ring,
And that is all absolutely true. And I will go ahead and say, with me, I was actually fortunate I can go ahead and say it and then I'll explain it. I was actually fortunate enough to go ahead and work within Booker T School of Wrestling in Texas. Now I was working the food truck side of it. So I got in the ring, but it was to have some fun because I was allowed to do so whenever they weren't having the shows and everything. And I was able to actually see how the ring was built and all, which is very interesting, because you would think that it's just, it comes formed like that. It doesn't. It takes a lot of work to put everything together. And all of the wrestlers that are involved in the school have to have hands-on in building these things, because that's the foundation of how all that starts. So my point is, whenever I was there for the school and everything and being around everybody, it's not just the physical, like December was talking about. It's not just like you were talking about over there, John, with that. It's also the emotional, the mental. There is so much that's involved in there that makes it where it is not fake, because there's a lot of pressure that's put on you to go ahead and prove yourself above and beyond every single other person that's out there. And not only just because of the promoter wanting you to do it, or the manager or whatever type thing, the fans. Mm-hmm. The fans are the one who control the energy that's going in and out of that squared circle. And a lot of people don't understand. And if you've never been to a wrestling match, that's where you feel some serious energy. If you think you get it from going to a football game or a baseball game or something like that, I have never felt energy like I have in going to actual wrestling matches, which has been amazing.
Because there's a reason it's as popular as it is. I mean, it's not a fluke. It's not a fluke that it's been probably the most popular sport in the world, really, from God. I mean, how far back? When they were doing wrestling in the carnivals. I mean, it has been an amazing, popular sport, and has retained that and grown. I mean, obviously, Vince took it to all new different levels. Through the 80s, when he was really expanding and walking into the different territories. But it has just morphed into something that I don't think anybody could have even expected. And it's because of that energy that's there. I mean, you don't get it. You said it perfectly. You don't get that from any other sport. I mean, probably if I could compare it to anything, it'd probably be MMA fighting would probably get you maybe up to the intensity level. Or if it's a team sport, maybe hockey. I remember I always said that old joke, you showed up at a fight and a hockey game broke out. It might get you to that somewhat level of intensity, but there's nothing quite like it.
You can even tell these days too, like with the coronavirus breaking out, there is a dramatic shift in events with a crowd versus without a crowd. Wrestling without its fans, without the energy, you can tell how it significantly affects the wrestlers that perform the moves with a crowd versus without a crowd. Like the entire schematics of a match is thrown off completely. So anytime that a fan or someone is talking about like how they don't matter or what is the true dynamic of wrestling, I just tell them watch a match like with an audience versus without, and there's your answer right there. It's all about the fans.
And that is very cool, because that's the way it should be. Not only with wrestling, because we're also talking about comics, it should always be about the fans. It should never be about just one or different levels where type thing. It's got to always be about the end game, which is the fans, because those are the ones that keep the lights on whenever everything's said and done. So my next question is, and of course we'll start with you, December, is who's the one wrestler that you've met in your career that's been the most influential with you?
That I've met or that I've seen? I'm sorry, the computer broke out.
No, that's okay. That you've met or seen, or that's been the most influential with you.
I'd probably say Diamond Dallas Page. He just has this. I loved his message of positivity. I used to watch him in WCW growing up, and there were others that I probably like watched more or picked up after more, like while I was wrestling, or like everybody that knows me knows I'm the hugest Sting fan. Like that's not a secret, like at all. But Diamond Dallas Page like probably had the biggest influence over me because of his positivity. Like he was always like all about the fans, like do this, believe in yourself, and that's grown even more lately with his yoga. He's very encouraging. Like his yoga, that's a legit thing. He really believes in that. The results are real. He's always talking about bettering yourself, bettering others, bettering other wrestlers. Like he's saved Scott Hall, he saved Jake the Snake. Like they were in dark places and he pulled them out, and they'll tell you firsthand that he brought them out into the light. And I just think that that's a really good message for not just wrestlers, but for people. Like wrestling, it just brings about so much pain, and it doesn't really help people. Like once you get into wrestling, it just kind of leaves you battered. But DDP was the one person that I saw healing people. And I just thought that was such a good message. And I kind of want to start healing too. So that just kind of always impacted me really, really deeply. And I look forward to seeing what he's going to do next, because he's just such a good person. And he's a very nice guy. I was lucky enough to meet him a couple of times, and that's a genuine thing. He really is a really good guy.
That is very cool. And he always seemed like, even whenever he was playing heel and all that kind of thing, he still had that persona of, he was the mascot, for the other guys that were coming out there and everything. And he was rooting them on, because every once in a while you'd see in the backstage, and they always show, they're watching the Teletron in the back or whatever type deal. And you would see Diamond Dallas Page, and he'd be over there, and every once in a while he'd slip up, and he'd be like, a smile would come across instead of being in that heel mode like you normally should be. And it was cool to see that, because that was that genuine nature that actually came straight out of him. So I do agree with you on that. That is very cool. Now, John, what about you?
Well, with the guys I've worked with, I'd have to say Rocky Johnson. I remember the first time I met Rocky. I mean, that guy, I don't know if either of you have ever met Rocky before, but Rocky was larger than life. I mean, I got to remember, before there was the Rock, there was the Mountain. And Rocky, I remember the first time I met Rocky, I had been at a luncheon with Brian Blair, and I'm sitting there talking to somebody. I think I may have been talking to Bugsy McGraw. And I hear, hey, are you the comic book guy? And I turn around and I'm like, holy shit, it's Rocky Johnson. Now, I had seen him when I came in, but I was intimidated. I mean, I was like, that's the father of the Rock. You don't just walk up to a Hall of Famer and start talking to him. You don't know him. So I just kind of like saw him there, and I'm just kind of being cool, talking to the guys I did know. And he says, I'm talking to you. Come over here. So I walk over, and he goes, you're the comic book guy. I said, I guess so. And he goes, well, how come you haven't written my comic yet? Am I not famous enough? And I said, of course you're famous enough. I said, you haven't asked me. He goes, well, I'm asking you now. And he goes, well, here's my business card. He goes, give me a call. We're going to do my book, and you better put me over. So, that was the start of a wonderful relationship. I mean, we went from that to, we did do his book. Rocky and I want to say probably every other weekend we would hang out together. So he would see me at my high points, and he would see me at my low points. But no matter what Rocky was going through, and this is a guy that had hip surgeries, he had knee surgeries, he had back surgeries, he was always smiling. He was always signing for the fans. He was always Mr. Positive, And he would say the same thing. He'd go, John, if you're ever feeling down about yourself, put yourself over, And that's just the positivity that I always looked forward to. And I do miss it. Now, funny thing is, I remember I did have the privilege of being at his funeral. It was a pretty closed funeral. There weren't a lot of people there, but I got to see, Dwayne talk about his dad, and I got to talk to Dwayne for a little bit afterwards. And one of the things he said to me, he says, I want to thank you for what you did for my dad. he says he talked about you and he really loved this book, and I just really appreciate what you did. He goes, and I know right now, I said the first thing he probably ever told you was to put him over, wasn't it? So it was it was a nice experience, and I think Rocky made me a better person. He made me a more confident person in what I'm doing, and I'm thankful for it. And I think it kind of follows on what December was saying about DDP. Maybe that's just something about pro wrestlers, that they've gone out, it's such a fraternity. I've learned, and I'm talking as a guy who's on the outside. I mean, I just write comics for pro wrestling. By no means am I on the inside. I'm just a guy on the outside. I'm just a fan who's gotten lucky. But to me, pro wrestlers, it seems like they're a fraternity. It reminds me of my fraternity when I was in college. I mean, these are your brothers or these are your sisters. They're people you'd go to toe for anytime, And I really admire that about them and about Rocky. And Rocky really showed that to me. And I always felt that he kind of gave that to me too. He treated me like I was that brother.
And that is very cool. I've had the opportunity to meet several, like I said, with the Booker T School of Wrestling, things that were going on. The most memorable, I don't remember the year. I think it was 2006, 2007. I was at the Houston Car Show with my son. We went there specifically because John Cena was going to be there. So yes, we were one of those that stood in line for over 3 hours.
And did you ever see him? I'm sorry.
So that's the point of this, is we were actually up there. I kid you not, we were probably 20 people away from him. And the promoter stepped away from the John Cena's table and said, "I'm sorry, we're shut down. He can't see anyone else, blah, blah, blah." Now, I was wearing the John Cena jersey, which I still have because it's signed. We're about to get to that one. My son, he's 6 years old at the time, and he is dressed up, and he's got the word life all over him, the headband and the foam knuckle things and everything. He was all decked out. So we were like, oh man, and all of us are kind of like, well, John stands up, and he's not a small guy, by the way. So whenever he's sitting down, it's very, very misleading. He stood up, he went around the side of the table, picked up the table, moved it over to the side. He went over and stood over there, and he goes, "From this person right here all the way to that column over there, I know all these people have been here all day. Everyone else just came in, toward the end because they knew what time I was going to be here till. So I'm going to take care of all these people here." So we're like, okay, great. So we go up there. And of course he says, whenever we get up there, me and my son, he's like, "What do you have for me to sign?" And I'm like, I've got this right here for you to sign. He's like, "Do you have anything else?" And I was like, "Well, your thing only said one per person." And he said, "Well, you've got a kid here." And I was like, "Well, I have your CD. My son wants you to sign that for him." And he's like, "Yeah, I'll sign that." So he signs. He goes, "You got anything else?" And I was like, so he ended up signing a print, and he signed something else. So as we're starting to walk away, he yells, and I say yells in the nicest way. He's like, "You." And I stop. And of course my back's to him, and he goes, "Don't move." And I'm like, oh man, what is fixing to happen here? Well, he gets a Sharpie and he signs my jersey right on my back. So my son, he's down there and he goes, Dad, do you think I can give him a hug?" And John heard that, and he reaches down and he goes, "But you're so heavy." 6 years old. And he picks him up. He's acting like he's having a hard time picking him up. Gives him a big hug. My son gets down there and he knuckle bumps him. And it was very cool. I mean, immediately I went to the convenience place and got the nearest t-shirt that I could buy for like, $10, $15, whatever, and changed my shirt. And that never got put back on after that. But it just meant a lot that he actually went out of his way. So the point is that they're not always the people that you kind of think they are just from seeing what's on TV. So you don't want to have that perception automatically that a wrestler is a movie star or worse, because they're already getting all the limelight and everything, so they have no time for anybody, because there are so many of them that actually do, which is very cool. So I just wanted to bring that up on my end with that. So John, I'm going to ask you this. Why meld comics and wrestling together?
Well, and I'm sorry I had to get up for a second. My wife is taking our dog out. So
oh, you're good.
I've always felt that wrestlers and comics are a perfect fit. I mean, wrestlers are made for comics. I mean, you've got people that are larger than life. They can do these amazing things. We kind of talked about this earlier. They can fly off a top rope. They can do these moves that the typical human being can't do. As much as they might think they can't do it. They're stronger than we are. They're faster than we are. And they come in a costume. I mean, they're perfectly situated to be a superhero. I remember talking to Brian Blair when we first were doing his, and I kind of mentioned that to him. It's one of the ways I used to sell it to the guys when I would talk to them about doing a comic. I'd say, you're made for comics. And Brian said, it's funny you say that, because I remember when I was a little kid, my parents asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And Brian said, I told him I either want to be Superman or I want to be a professional wrestler. So he put a tight little cape around his neck, and he said he climbed on the back of his couch. He leaped off the couch, and bam, he landed face first on the floor. And he realized that he wasn't Superman. He couldn't fly, but he could be a professional wrestler. So he said, he goes, it's funny you say that, because that's really what he even thought of as a little kid. He saw professional wrestlers as superheroes. So I feel blessed that we're able to actually give that to some of them and actually turn them into a comic and put them in there and let them, and like I remember when I was talking to Jake Hager, he says, what kind of guys are going to what people are going to want to have a comic? I said, well, first of all, I think it's when I would go to an event and I would meet a wrestler, I think it's cool to get an 8x10 or to meet them for a photo, but you can have a book on their life. You can have them in comics. You can have for the same price. Why not? And I said, and look at it this way, because I could hear Jake's kids running around in the background as we would do our interviewing. And I said, you got kids. How much would your kids love to have their dad in a comic book? It's something you can leave behind, not only for your kids or when I talk to Bruno for his grandkids, he's got that to leave behind for him.
And that is very cool. And it kind of solidifies you in history at that point, whether it's in book form, comic form, but in comic form just gives it more of that larger than life, what they actually were, what they meant, how they actually lived life. And I like how that was done with that.
Yeah, it's always nice to have pictures. Plus, as I told these guys when I talked to them, a lot of the guys that I'm writing for, I'm a big fan of old school wrestling. We talked earlier. I grew up on championship wrestling in Florida. Thank you. Yeah, I love it. I mean, no knock on the current product. I'm not as big of a fan, but I love the old school stuff. Exactly. And I thought it's a nice way to introduce the kids today to what I used to watch and what I loved. And I'll tell you what, I mean, it was a real good product. It really was. I mean, these are people, December kind of mentioned it. They'd hand them a mic and they just had to go out and do a promo. It wasn't a script that they rehearsed over and over from, 7 a.m. until before they went on TV at 8 o'clock at night. You had to get out there on your toes and you had to say something. I mean, I remember I did a Comic-Con with Brian Blair one time, and he's talking to me like we're talking now, and someone says, "Hey, will you do a promo for my podcast?" And Brian suddenly, like that, clicked into promo mode, and I felt like I was Mean Gene standing next to him. I mean, I didn't know what to do. It's like, oh my God, what just happened to Brian? I mean, he totally went from County Commissioner Brian Blair to be Brian Blair. I mean, he was buzzing and jumping around, and it was just really amazing. He still had it.
That is very cool. Now, December, as I recall, you're not put in a comic yet, right?
Yeah, that's true. I'm my own comic though, I guess.
So I'm going to go ahead and give a shout out and a recommendation, because Tom, I think, is still in here. So Tom from BDI, we need to put her in a comic. That's your shout out and recommendation right there. But I also want to give a shout out to December, because a lot of people aren't aware that even though she's not in a comic, she is on comics, because she does some amazing, amazing poetry, which you can find on the BDI books, which, yeah, you have to get those. So John, you definitely need to look into some of her stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can probably go to her page as well. Those links are on here for everybody on there. But the poetry is amazing. So even though you haven't been put into a comic yet, December, your poetry is amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I've been a fan of the written word for a really long time. I've been writing even more than I've been wrestling, even longer than that.
Now, we did just get this just in. Let me go ahead and put this out here real quick. Breaking news, not yet. So Tom is listening because he hears everything and sees everything. I'm learning this. Yeah, BDI needs a one of those. Yeah.
BDI's got some good stuff coming up. They've got their 10-year anniversary of Critter is going to be this summer. So in between June and July, that's going to happen on Kickstarter, just like John's is happening right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I could not agree more, Tom.
Yay! I love BDI. Actually, wrestling is kind of how I met Tom. I was with my roommate at the time, and I met her through wrestling. She was a fan of mine, and we eventually became roommates. And we went to C2E2. I'd never heard about it, and she told me what it was. And I went to the huge BDI booth. If anybody knows Tom, they know how big that BDI booth is. And I ended up talking to him for a really long time. And I loved his books. They're amazing. I mean, anybody who's read them knows how great they are. And we became friends after that. And then he came to see me wrestle. So he's one of the people that has actually seen me in the ring before. So that to me is incredible.
Yes, and Tom put this up here earlier, so I'll just go ahead and backtrack because he put this. I watched you get speared, and I was almost crying.
Yeah, I thought I was dead. That was Joe Heisman had accidentally speared me when our dreaded nemesis, Wally Wild, pushed me in front of him. It's on YouTube.
Now, John, I'm going to ask you this because ever since I heard about this project you're doing and everything, this is the first question I actually came up with. It's not the first in line here, but I've been holding it back. Is there any blowback from the current CEO or CFO on what you're doing? The whole "you're fired," did that come out or anything?
Oh, are you talking about like anything from the powers that be up in the large corporation?
Yes.
No, actually, I want to be very positive about them because when I started working for Bruno, Bruno was a guy who was very by the book. Which you would probably expect from Bruno Sammartino. So before we started doing Bruno's, he said, let me run it by Vince. And so about 2 weeks later, I got a call from WWE Legal, and they said, go for it. Which was nice because they, a lot of the guys we're working with were under Legends contracts, including Nikolai and Hacksaw and Bruno. And then I'm going to throw something new. I don't know if you knew I was doing this. A contract I just signed about 2 weeks ago. I'm going to be writing my first non-comic, full-length autobiography for the Bushwhackers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Luke Williams and Butch Miller. And Luke, the same thing. I said, Luke, my only concern is I don't want to tick off the guys up in New York. He says, oh, John, don't worry about it. Let me give him a call. So about a week later, he called me and said, hey, John, we're clear with New York. So they've been actually very cool with us. Not necessarily, I don't think, because it's John Crowther. I think it's because, despite any negativity some people might feel towards him, I think he does very much respect the veterans in this business. Because Vince has been in this business for many, many, many years, and so is his family. So they do have a lot of respect for the veterans, and these guys, all they want to do is tell their life story. It's not about making money off Vince. It's not about, trying to do anything like that. It's about getting their story out because, like you said, this is their history, and wrestling is part of American history, and these men are part of wrestling, and they are part of history, and so are the women. And that's one thing, December, one thing we do want to do is we want to try and connect and get more women involved in some of these comics. As I mentioned, we've got a couple of the Glow Girls. We've got Sunny. We've got Hollywood. I have been chatting with Thunder Rosa, and I kind of expect that we're going to have a Thunder Rosa book come out probably in the next year or so.
I met her.
Yeah, she's a really, really cool girl. And
yeah, she wrestles kind of by me, or she did.
Very cool. Very cool. And one of the things I like about working with her too is I'd like to do we talked about doing some crossover and trying to make some connections with the Latin fans, which is very important, especially to her.
They have some of the greatest fans ever. I love their fans.
And trying to do these books and so that we cross over the language too, so that they can actually enjoy some of what we're writing too, and see some of their heroes in comics as well. And hopefully we can start that up with Thunder Rosa and maybe touch base with some other girls, hint about getting some other books out there, because like I said, when you weren't on, I don't know when I first originally said this, how I got into comics. I actually did it for my daughter. So I think it's important not just for for guys and boys to read comics. I think it's equally important for girls to read comics and have heroes to look up to in comics. It shouldn't. That's why I did my first comic, because I didn't think that my daughter had a strong female character to look up to. So my belief was, if you don't like what you see, do something about it. So that's what I did, and that's how I got into comics. And hopefully we can draw some more interest of some of the females that maybe want to have books. Another one we talked to not too long ago is ODB, and she was a big character I always loved in wrestling. So I'd like to get a good one out there for ODB also, maybe. So we'll see what comes down the pipe.
Yeah, I met ODB. I had a birthday, and she found out it was my birthday, and I have the picture from that. And I have a very odd look on my face, shall we say, because she reached down and grabbed my butt as soon as they took the picture. And yeah, she was having a blast with it. So yeah, it was fun times back then. Now, I'm going to ask, you've already kind of touched on, future plans for your books and everything, to have other books and other people going in there and everything. We did have way back at the very beginning. I think I put this up here. Jim Noble was asking, will it have Mick Foley and as many characters? I'm curious about this too, because you can't have just Mick Foley. You've got to have the different personalities in there.
Yeah, I can. Mick is not in this particular book. I have talked to a couple. Actually, I've got a good friend of mine who is in the comics industry who's very close with Mick, and we are going to try and talk to Mick down the road and see if it's something he'd be interested in. I know he has done some things in the past. Some of his Christmas books and stuff like that. And obviously Mick Foley is a legend in wrestling, and not just as Mick Foley, but Cactus Jack and all those.
Mankind, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is, and I remember Mick as Cactus Jack when I was a kid. I mean, he was another one of those, scary, just over the top characters. Yeah, exactly. That would bang, bang. He'd come in there and you never knew what to expect from him. So yeah, it would be an honor to do Mick's book, and maybe he'll watch your podcast and he'll call me up and say, John, what are you waiting for? But if not, hopefully I'll be able to make a connection with him and try and talk him into it.
Hey, I would love for him and everyone else to watch this. Would be absolutely amazing.
Hey, you might be surprised. You never know. You never know who's listening and who's watching. That's what I learned with Nikolai when I got reached out to by Nikolai Volkov before I got to do my first comic for a wrestler, and I found out he loved comics. Like you said with December's a big fan of comics. I think a lot of times people watch professional wrestling and all they see is the wrestler. They don't realize that there's a human being behind what they're seeing on TV or what they're seeing in the ring, and they're just like you and I. I mean, they're fans of toys, they're fans of comics, they're fans of other sports, they're fans of a lot of things. And I learned that real quick with Nikolai Volkov, and it's led to some wonderful experiences.
Hey, John,
cool.
You'd be amazed at how many wrestlers are comic fans.
I've learned
probably like 90%.
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
I remember one of a cool posts, and I don't know if anything will ever come out of this either, but when we posted our first announcement about the Encyclopedia of Pro Wrestling, one of the first comments I got was from the guy I always think of with wrestling and comics, and that's Shane Helms. He jumped on my post and said, how can you do a comic book on pro wrestling and not include Shane Helms? So, hopefully, it'd be nice. I know he does a lot of work with Michael Kingston. It'd be nice to try and bring Shane into the circle and maybe do some books with him too.
Very cool. So that kind of leads up into the last here. Is I'm going to start with December on this one first. Is what's in the future for December?
What's not in the future for December? I keep my doors open. I'm starting to do more with comics, as you can probably tell. I want to start involving myself more with the independent comic industry. So I'm starting to learn more about that. Definitely more with writing. I've been writing more, hopefully to get some books published. I am in several anthologies right now, but hopefully I'll have just mine. So not to just put a total damper on the anthologies, but just have more of my own works published. And still keep good tabs on the indie scene in comics. Maybe make a couple of appearances in indie wrestling when it comes back. I've seen good things on the indie scene. I'm glad that it's in the hands that it's in. It's healthy and it's doing good. So I'm glad to see that. And I have my own blog and Facebook, and you guys can keep tabs on me that way. I still amuse people by staying in character, because for some reason you guys like that. You guys like when I throw tantrums.
John, what about you? What's in the future for John and the rest of the stuff that you're working on?
Okay, well, there's a few things. I mean, if you're comic book fans, check your comic shops. I've got solicitations with Antarctic Press. I've got Exciting Comics #6, should be hitting comic stores here in about a month or so. We're closing out our horror comic series with Antarctic Press. I've got some new stuff coming out with Heavy Metal Magazine. A few anthologies some people have got me to jump on. We've got a zombie story coming out with Caliber Comics. Of course, we've got another 2.5 days on this Encyclopedia Pro Wrestling, so I encourage people, if they're interested, to jump on board, check it out. If you like what you see, grab yourself a copy and maybe win one of those autographs. We do have the next book that's going to follow up in the pro wrestling scene behind the encyclopedia is the 3rd issue of the Killer Bees book, which will be followed then by Gangrel. We're doing a one-shot for the Vampire Warrior, which is actually, I think he's another character that was made for comics. And it's a great story that really touches on his life. And we get Luna Vachon in there, which is another wonderful character from pro wrestling. We've got Hollywood's book that's going to come out. We're finishing up Bobby Fulton's series. And then, of course, starting next week, I'll be doing my interviews with Butch and Luke. And we're actually calling it Bushwhackers, Tales from the Road. So there's going to be some really fun stories you're going to have in there from their time as the Kiwis and the sheep herders and their run through the WWF. You're going to, I mean, if you're into humor, if you've ever seen or talked to Luke Williams, he's one trip. He really is. And I'm looking forward to getting some of those stories. And we won't have to be as PG or G rated in the regular book as we are in the comics. So you'll probably get some really good stuff in that book. And that's going to be coming for those of you who might or might not know Kenny Casanova. He's got WOHW Publishing, and they've done Brutus Beefcake's book and Sabu's and Vader's and Kamala's and Bugsy's, a bunch of good books. That's the one who's going to be putting out our Bushwhacker book too. So, it should be out there. We're looking at 2021 most likely.
Very nice. Well, we've come to that point. I think we're going to go ahead and start closing everything out right now. So if I can go ahead and start with December, and whenever we're done with this, if you want to go ahead and stop in the green room, we can talk afterwards. That's no problem at all. So if you'll stay back there, December, if you'll tell us who you are, what you do, and where to find you.
I'm December Lace. I am currently a sometimes writer for Big Dog Inc. comics. Right now, I also do poetry, short fiction, and also a morbid horror fairy tales. You can find me at decemberlace.blogspot.com and also on facebook.com/ can't remember my own Facebook. I think it's Miss December 32. I'm also on Twitter at the Miss December, and Instagram the Miss December.
There we go. And John, if you'll go ahead and go ahead and give us your last pitch on there. Tell them, hey, we got less than 3 days. We need to jump on the Kickstarter.
Yeah, exactly. Check out the Kickstarter. We've got, I think, about 2.5 days left. We finish up Sunday night. We've got a couple more free autographs that'll be going out. I think we got a Hacksaw Jim Duggan, maybe a Bobby, or not a Bobby Fulton, but a Ricky Morton. So all you got to do is back it, and you're in the running for a free autograph. So check it out. We really appreciate your help getting the book together and getting it out there. You can find me on just about every social media site. You can find me, just follow my name. It's John Crowther on Facebook. I accept most friend requests unless you seem really scary or something. I've also got a writer page. It's John E. Crowther, comic book writer. You'll find me on Instagram. You'll find me on Twitter. You can also follow Squared Circle Comics. That's a good place where you can see what's coming out next from Squared Circle, and it'll give you a link to our regular website where you can actually buy single issues too, if that's what you're into. So thank you.
Very cool. Thank you both for being on here this evening, and we've gotten a lot more information out there about the wrestling world, the comic world, and how they actually intermingle together, which is amazing. So thank you both for being here, and I hope to have y'all both on here again here very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. You guys are both rock stars.
Thank you, December. And thank you, Phil. It was great being on.
My pleasure. All right. So we had a great show. We learned a lot about the wrestling world. We learned a little bit about how the comics actually play into there, and how wrestling and comics are not very different from one another. Whenever you're actually going ahead and writing it like this. So I always have a closing statement. Tonight's not going to be any different on that. I never script anything. So I always base it off of my interview. And at one point, John mentioned about being lucky and being in the industry. Now I've kind of touched on the fact that, I've kind of wondered with my personal thing with where I am and everything, if I was lucky being here or if I was actually supposed to be here. Now, the more that I have guests of this caliber that keep showing up and keep wanting to do these interviews, it reminds me that it's not luck. This is something that is like gets like, respect gets respect. So as long as you're going ahead and doing things for the right reasons, there's good karma that comes off of that. But remember, as soon as you start doing things for the wrong reasons, well, I think you can do the math off that one. So that's my closing statement for tonight. I hope you all enjoyed everything on here. Demon Phil, Comics and More, New Jersey. Keep it indie, y'all.